Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Jeff Short, and today we're going to be looking at just one part of all of the turmoil that's been going on in our culture. Here at Christ and Culture, I try to bring a Christian perspective. I try to bring a biblical perspective on the current events that we're facing today. One of the frustrations oftentimes in the church is that all of these things are happening outside the church walls on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then we come into church on Sunday, and it's as if nothing is going on out there. There is no context. We just come into the church and we deal with topics that are totally disconnected from our life the 6 other days of the week. And it seems to be artificial. It seems to be out of touch. And so what I want to try to do is bring the truth and current events together. We have a body of truth. We have the Bible, the Word of God. That gives us an anchor, a foundation upon which to walk on this earth 6 days other than Sunday. And so we need to think about things as they unfold, and we need to think as Christians about these things, and to not be isolated in airtight little bubble and say, okay, our Christianity is all about how I feel and what I'm doing internally and what peace I have and how I'm not afraid and all of these psychological things. Yes, our faith helps us stay strong and not shaken by all of the things that are going on around in our world, but we need to understand what's going around in our world. I've been telling people for months now during this COVID-19 lockdown and the epidemic, and now that we have the elections over, I've been telling people we are going through a spiritual battle right now. We are going through a spiritual and moral battle. There are forces in our culture that want to destroy the biblical, godly, moral standards that we have as Christians hold dearly to. They want to destroy marriage. They want to destroy marriage as a man and a woman. They want to destroy the differences between men and women. They want to blend it all together. There's a revolution taking place in the moral arena of our society. We have to understand that. We cannot do church as usual. What is church as usual? In the West, church as usual is basically, okay, our society is basically Judeo-Christian in context, and we can go to church on Sunday, and then when we leave on Monday and go to our work on Monday, the culture is operating in basically a semi-Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview. The moral standards of society do not contradict and sometimes reinforce. That's the old way. Today, when we go out to work on Monday, our culture is anti-Christian, anti-Christ. The morality they're pumping and pushing is contrary to the Word of God. The whole worldview that is out there in society is contrary to the Word of God. So we have to learn how to think through that, because if we don't, we're going to be sucked in and assimilated into the culture. Well, the question I want to talk about today, we have a Vice President, Mike Pence. He is an evangelical Christian. I do not doubt his faith. I do not doubt his commitment to the Lord. But I want to ask the question in the light of events of the last few days and last week. I want to ask the question, did Mike Pence cave in recently? Did Mike Pence wimp out, if you want to put it on the language of the street? Was he a wimp? Was he a coward? Did he back down in his moment of combat? And the reason I ask that is because for the last 2 months since the 2020 presidential election, there have been major allegations and charges of irregularities, illegalities, mischief in vote counting, the election, and you know the whole controversy. Um, there are 4, 5, 6 states, key battleground states, that had all kinds of voting irregularities. They changed the law right before the elections. They had this massive mail-in ballots with very few rules and regulations as to what ballots are legitimate, which are not. Signature matchings were loosened, all kinds of things. And the Trump team has been going around to these different key battleground states and presenting all of the evidence of voter irregularities. Let's call it that. The reason I have to call it that is because another issue that has come up during this whole time. While the Trump team has been trying to make their argument that there were voter irregularities, the big tech companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of these major platforms for information in our society, they are censoring out conversations about this whole topic. And so while the Trump team, Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis, who is a solid, strong evangelical Christian, she is also representing John MacArthur out in California to keep his church open from California's strict lockdown orders, that they don't want that church open, and MacArthur is defying the county and state governments and keeping his church open. Jenna Ellis, solid evangelical Christian, she is a lawyer on the Trump team, and they have been going around presenting the massive amount of evidence. We're talking about sworn affidavits. We're talking about statistical experts, computer experts, every single conceivable angle of this irregularity, voter irregularity in these key battleground states has been analyzed, and they have been attempting to get their case heard in a court. And finally, it came to a head. Texas, the state of Texas, and the legislature there filed a lawsuit against those key states before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court didn't even take the case, refused to take the case, and said, oh, well, you don't have standing to file. In other words, a technicality. So no court in this election period would even take the case, which is totally frustrating because, look, did it happen or did it not happen? I've made some videos before saying, look, as a Christian, I just want to know what happened, okay? If Biden won, so be it. If Trump won, so be it. I voted for Trump. I supported Trump. I believe he's most compatible with our Christian values, our Judeo-Christian values. I believe that he matches better those Judeo-Christian values. Sure, I would have preferred to see him win. But if he lost honestly, fair and square, okay, I can deal with that because, after all, we've seen liberal Democrats Barack Obama. We've seen liberal Democrats Bill Clinton. In the past, our team lost. We accepted it. But this time, there were serious questions raised about the legality of the voting process in these 5 or 6 key battleground states. And the frustrating part about it is that no court, the Supreme Court especially, would not hear the merits of the case. They wouldn't even consider the evidence. There was no forum for the Supreme Court, evidently, to take all the evidence, have the lawyers for the Trump team argue their case, have the lawyers from the different states argue against it, and have it out in court and get to the bottom of this, because some 70 to 80 million people voted for the president and want to see if he, in fact, really did lose, as the mainstream media is telling us that we must believe, and as big tech is telling us we must accept. Did that actually happen? Well, What happened eventually was that the legislatures from these 5 or 6 battleground states, they sent dueling electors to Congress for certification. The Republicans sent Republican Donald Trump electors, and the Secretary of States and the governors sent another for Joe Biden. They sent those. And so here, Mike Pence, and let me bring him up here. We're going to actually read a little bit about him. Here, Mike Pence actually was in charge of counting the votes and determining what would happen with these votes. Now, he wants to be careful because he doesn't want to set a bad precedent. He doesn't want to be unfair. He doesn't want to appear to be biased. He's the vice president he's part of the Trump-Pence team, and yet he's the one that the Constitution says must count the votes and preside over the meeting of the Congress to determine these electors and make the official certification. And so the lawyers from the Trump team, after having amassed this mountain of evidence to show that there were irregularities that would call in the election, call into question the election of 2020, they asked Mike Pence, what you can do would really be good would be for you to take those 5 or 6 states that sent the dueling electors, take those electors, those dual electors, one for Biden, one for Trump, and send them back to the state legislatures and ask them one question: which set of electors should we count in Congress for the certification? That's all he had to do. He could have done everything he could have legally to get a fair hearing on this evidence. I mean, doesn't he accept that this election was rigged? Doesn't he accept the argument of the Trump lawyer team? It's looking like more and more that Mike Pence himself did not believe that the election was stolen. It looks like Mike Pence, the running mate of Donald Trump, the person who worked with Trump for 4 years, it looks like Mike Pence didn't actually believe all that evidence that Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and all of these people working with the Trump team were presenting to the states. Now, maybe he did. I haven't heard from him as far as what he really believes. But if he doesn't believe that there isn't enough evidence to warrant an investigation, what is he doing on the Trump team? He doesn't even, he thinks that what happened in, say, Wayne County, Michigan, and all the irregularities there, he thinks that what happened in Georgia, where the workers were sent home and then they counted votes in the middle of the night without observers, he thinks all of this is kosher? I hope he doesn't. But what it seems to be the case is that Mike Pence, I would hope that he actually has looked over the evidence and hasn't bought into the lie of the mainstream media that says, well, nothing to see here, folks. This was a normal election. Everything went great. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and Joe Biden just beat us. I hope he doesn't think that, because if he does, he's so gullible and naive that if he were to run in the future, I don't think I would vote for him, because he doesn't seem to understand the reality that is right before him. So what the Trump team, Jenna Ellis and Rudy Giuliani and others, with all this massive evidence, they went to Pence, Vice President Pence, and said, We know you want to do the right thing. We know you want to do everything according to the Constitution and legal. Here's the last effort that you can make, and it won't be that you are deciding this on your own. You simply toss these 5 or 6 battleground states electors back to the legislature in the states and say, please give to me one set of electors. You guys send up one set of electors so we can certify this election. But he didn't do it. He would not do that. He caved in. When it was his moment to have some guts and to have some courage and to stand up so that the 70 to 80 million people that voted for Donald Trump and him on the Trump team could at least have their day in court, or at least try to have their day in court. Try to get some fairness to this operation. And he backed down. He took it, played it safe. He caved in. And you have to wonder, why did he do that? Why did Mike Pence, the evangelical Christian who has been a very loyal and solid backer of conservative causes, why didn't he give it all his all? Why didn't he give it 100%? Why didn't he try as hard as he could to have the 70 to 80 million people who voted for him and the president? Why didn't he give it everything he had and played out all his hand within the constitutional law? Why didn't he do that? I think one of the reasons why is we have come to a stubborn fact with our brother in Christ, Mike Pence, and that is he just caved in. He didn't have the courage to take that bold step because he would have faced a lot of criticism in the mainstream media. But I think as Christians, we need to begin to realize we don't need the mainstream media's accolades. We don't need the mainstream media and their approval. We don't need any of the left or big tech or anybody else's approval. Not in the Washington establishment. We don't need the GOP establishment's approval. We need to go ahead and try as best we can to implement a solid Christian conservative agenda. I think one of the reasons why Mike Pence caved in is that he has a propensity to back down when the fighting and the battle gets heavy. Unfortunately, I don't like to say that, but he's done it before. And I remember back in 2015, here's an article of Politico that described what Mike Pence did in 2015. And I remember when I heard that Trump had picked Mike Pence to be his presidential running mate as vice president, I began to immediately think, oh, wait a minute. Wasn't he the governor that backed down under pressure of the LGBTQ lobby and big business during the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana? Yes, that's the same Mike Pence. Here's the article in Politico back then, way back in 7/15/2016. It says, evangelicals still peeved over Pence's Religious Freedom Act flip. And here's a subtitle. It was the worst we've ever been stabbed in the back by a Republican, says a conservative Iowa radio host, Steve Deese. Donald Trump's new running mate is a born-again evangelical Christian. He's fiercely opposed to abortion rights, and he's a staunch defender of Israel. Good, solid. But that's not enough for some evangelicals and other conservatives plugged into that community, especially those previously backing Ted Cruz who haven't forgiven Indiana Governor Mike Pence for his backtracking on a religious freedom measure in his state. Resentment over his waffling on a bill that was important to social conservatives has dampened enthusiasm in some quarters for Trump's running mate, who Trump's allies had hoped would help improve relationships with evangelicals skeptical of Trump's social conservative bona fides. Okay. In 2015, Pence initially signed a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. He then backpedaled on language that critics feared could discriminatorily against gay people, but that some evangelicals felt was essential in defending religious freedom. So what happened was he backtracked and basically watered the thing down, so it really didn't offer much of anything for religious groups. Social conservatives saw the move as a disappointment at best, and at worst, a betrayal, and some are still smarting over it. The reason why conservatives are not going to be moved that much by this choice is because Mike Pence, when he had an opportunity to stand up for religious liberty, to mark himself in history, he didn't do it, said South Carolina-based pastor Mike Gonzalez. I never thought of that of Mike, but when it came down to it, he crumbled under pressure. That, for many evangelical conservatives, has been something that is a red flag. So he had an opportunity to take a historic stand and say, look, I'm going to stand with this bill. This bill is trying to help religious organizations and churches and Christian colleges and Christian organizations to not have to cave to the LGBTQ causes and pressures. And he took a lot of heat for that, and he caved in. So we have Mike Pence, before he became vice president, backing down from the battle. In other words, the battle became heated and hot and intense. And what did Mike Pence do? He backed down. He wouldn't stand up to the LGBTQ lobby bullying Christian organizations. And so what he did was he went back and he modified the language of the bill, and he basically gutted it of its substance, pretty much watered it all down, compromised it so that it's really not anything worth the paper that it's printed on. And it says here's another one, and conservative radio host Eric Erickson wrote this week. This is way back then. Christian evangelicals in particular were disheartened that Pence threw them under the bus. You know, it's really weird. A lot of the same feelings that evangelicals felt when Pence caved in and backed down from the Religious Freedom Restoration Act way back in 2015. A lot of those are the same feelings we're feeling right now toward Pence. He did the same thing. He didn't have to decide who was the winner in the election of 2020. He didn't have to do anything radical. All he had to do was say, from these 5 or 6 states, I have dueling electors sent to me. How can I count these? What I'm going to do is send these 2 sets of electors of the states that sent them to me to count. I'm going to send them back to the state, and the legislators in that state are going to decide between themselves, which is their constitutional right. If you look in the Constitution, it says that the legislatures of each sovereign state are the ones in charge of the election. So he sends them back to the states. They meet in session. They decide who they're going to send to Congress in Washington, D.C., and then Pence receives them back and counts those. That's all he had to do. And that would have been the best faith effort that he could have made, and tried to give at least our side at least another chance. He could have done that, but he didn't do that. Instead, he caved in, he backed down, he was intimidated, he was pressured, he was bullied by the left and by big tech and the media and the establishment Republicans to just basically do nothing, to contribute nothing for the Trump cause. And it's been very, very discouraging for a lot of Christians to see this evangelical Christian, Mike Pence, who has been very faithful and very loyal to Trump, not give it his best. He would have taken a lot of criticism from the left, of course. He would have been slammed by a lot of establishment, insider, Beltway Republicans for doing this. They would have just been up in arms for what he did. But on the other hand, he would have given the 70 to 80 million Republicans who voted for Trump and Pence, he would have given them at least another shot to have a hearing, to have this evidence weighed, and to have some semblance of justice toward their vote that many, perhaps half of the United States believes was cheated. And he didn't do it. He didn't do it. So that's where we are right now. We have a vice president who didn't give it his best, who took the easy way out, who said, I'm just going to basically count these votes. And he did allow for a couple of the senators to object and a couple of the House members to object. He did allow for them to go into conference for a couple hours in their separate chambers. But then after this whole Capitol Hill protest march fiasco that turned into something violent, after that, he brought everybody back together, and it seemed like that spooked him too. So he was shaken by that. He was spooked. He was intimidated. He was pressured. That event just caused him to say, oh, forget it. We're going to just count. We're just going to count the votes, and we're going to give Biden the victory, and this is the end of it. I'm tired of this, blah, 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 blah. In other words, he was not only spooked to not send these electors back to the states for clarification, he was spooked to hurry up the process and get it done with so that he could go home. That is not a battleground way for a soldier to conduct himself. That is not giving it your best. That's not giving it the old college try. That's wimping out. When you were put under pressure, you took the easy way out. You took the safe route. And I hate to say it, but evangelical Christian Mike Pence really caved in. And I don't think I would vote for him if he tried to run in 2024. I don't think I'd vote for him because he seems to fold under battle, under pressure. He caves. He doesn't stand up to the crowd. He doesn't stand up to the mob. He isn't willing to look at the mob, the leftist outrage mob, and say, this is the way I'm going to do this, and I don't want to hear any flack from you. And he doesn't stand up, and he lacks the courage of his convictions. Now, I'm presupposing that he looked at the evidence and believes that there is something to that. But I don't know. See, there's no explanation. He doesn't come on and say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is the reason I'm going to do it. It's just silent. And that's been one of the big frustrations this year. We've had to deal with this massive silence from every area of society. So hope that this has been a helpful commentary. Maybe you disagree with me, but I hope this has been helpful to raise the issue anyway. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.